Welcome back, everybody. It is Monday, April 17th, 2023. This is Season 3, Episode 8 already of the IDP Heat Seekers, brought to you by RotoHeat.com. I am Kraig Reith. With me, as always, is Austin. Austin, how is Monday treating you?
It's amazing. Our favorite day of the week, of course. And we have a really great show lined up for you guys today. Probably one of the most important positions on the IDP side of the ball. And so really excited to get to talking about these players. And when I, was scouting this class, one of the things I think I told you early on was like, man, this class really feels deep at the edge position. And that's a mix of, we say edge, and that's such a broad term. It's so weird trying to identify players and trying to figure out what position they'll play in the NFL, with the NFL kind of transitioning to like, what is an edge? Could be an outside linebacker. It could be your traditional like defensive end edge rusher who just, basically rushes the quarterback. So it's getting interesting to try to define that position, but I think that's what makes the discussion all that more fun is, you get to have a lot more diversity in this group of guys. And for that, you see a lot more talent. And I think the NFL recognizes that as well.
Yeah, so it varies by site. If your site incorporates the edge position at all, I know like Flea Flicker does offhand is for one of them, and there's a couple others that are changing it. MFL does a whole bunch of positional changes, and you can go to true position on there. But really what this does, if you have an edge position, you're grouping what are considered traditional 4-3 defensive ends and 3-4 outside linebackers because of the way that they score. And then they make plays on the field in similar fashion. It was just easier to group them together instead of having the outside linebackers with your traditional middle of the linebacking core, middle of the field guys, on-ball linebackers, and then the same thing, defensive ends like, Myles Garrett doesn't necessarily do the same thing as a defensive tackle like Quinnen Williams. So it's just trying to even out the scoring and how that goes. This is not going to be perfect tonight by any means because these guys don't have positions in the NFL. And even the same thing last week, we mentioned it because you're not going to hear us talk about Tyree Wilson. Well, why? We talked about defensive linemen last week. We don't know what he's going to be at the NFL level. So if you have questions about someone that you don't think we'll get to, don't know if we already got to, throw them in the chat. We can let you know if we got to him or not, or maybe we'll get to him tonight. And of course, if it's someone that we don't get to at all, hit us up on Twitter. You can see our handles down there. RotoHeat Discord, RotoHeat Facebook, all over the place. You can find us. So let us know. But with that, Austin, who do you want to start us off with tonight?
Let's start us off with somebody exciting, although let's not give all the best away. This guy was somebody that when I watched the film, I think that he was one of like the, top 3 to 5 guys that I was just like most impressed with and could probably even go. I think by the end of this, we're going to be like, yeah, he was probably ranked too low. And that's Tuli Tuipulotu. He's going to be 21 years old this season. He's a 3-star prospect coming out of high school in 2020. He spent 3 years at USC. He was the Polynesian Football Player of the Year, Pat Tillman Defensive Player of the Year, Morris Trophy winner, and a unanimous All-American in 2022. He was first team All Pac-12 in 2021 and 2022. So just tons and tons of accolades. 6'4", 290 pounds. Very exciting player from a physical standpoint. And then you look at the numbers, what he was able to do last year, 13.5 sacks, 22 tackles for loss. He wasn't super effective as far as just total tackles. He didn't jump off the page as far as that goes, but you look at his ability to, create disruption in the backfield and create pressure on the quarterback. And I was very impressed by that. He looks like a very polished pass rusher, which really stood out to me. And he looks like a really tremendous athlete. So he's definitely somebody that I'm very high on and I have high expectations for heading into the league. So I'm excited to see how he does. He didn't have any pro day or combine testing, so we didn't really get to get a great look at his RAS. But you put the film on again and you watch this kid play. He has tremendous athletic ability. His ability to split defenders and use a good combination of power and bend and speed and lateral agility and really kind of all the things that you like to see from a defensive end. edge rusher, if you will. I don't necessarily know that he has the ability to drop back and be effective in coverage. I really do think that he's going to be a better fit of just coming off the edge and creating pressure that way. He should have, he's a good tackler. He's not a bad tackler. It's not why his numbers were low. But I think what he did best was just rushing the passer. And, depending on where he lands in the landing spot, if he has an opportunity to start, I really think he could make an impact early. What are your thoughts?
I like that he's scheme versatile, but it's going to be one of those things where, depending on the team he goes to, he might be used at the end and then switch inside at times, more so than, like you said, an outside linebacker, just because with his size, with his build, he really isn't set to go out there and like you said, cover a running back, probably cover a tight end. He's got great motor and burst. People like to talk about violent hands. He has great hand usage when he's out there. It's just going to be interesting because he doesn't have the arm length necessarily that you'd want from a true edge guy, and you didn't see that a whole lot when he was on the outside. We see these tackles in the NFL. These guys are humongous with these, albatross-sized wingspans. Will that end up mattering for him or not? We'll have to see. I do think he's going to be productive, and I do agree he's probably going to be, I guess, as a day 2 pick, probably the second round. See where that goes. But you get draft capital like that, you're going to get some playing time initially at the NFL. You're just going to have to see where he goes. Is he going to be a true edge guy out there, defensive end? I had a couple concerns regarding, being able to contain that edge, and partly because of, length of his arms and pad level at times. That's stuff that's coachable as far as he can't coach arm length, obviously, but he can coach pad level. And with how productive that he was there at a big name school, USC is no small school these days. He had some down years there, but they're definitely back on track. And he showed well against the competition. So I do like him in our original ratings over at RotoHeat. Yeah, we were probably lower than we would want to be on him, but I think he's a good one, and I am excited to see where he goes, but more so, how are they going to use him? Is he going to be just stuck on the outside where fantasy-wise is probably better for us, or are they going to rotate him inside?
Yeah, that's a good question. And there's a little bit of a discrepancy here that I'm noticing when I'm looking at his profile. We have him listed at 290, and I think that's what he's listed at on the Sports Reference. But I did notice his RAS page. They have him listed at 266. So I'm kind of curious of why is there such a big weight discrepancy? That's one thing that, they did grade him poorly on at 266. And then you see 290, that's a pretty significant difference, I think, in my mind, especially for somebody who could potentially be, moved inside. What do you make of that? Anything at all?
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure where the RAS gets it from. If he weighed in at a pro day, because I know sometimes they do that and they don't do the positional drills and they don't do the testing. But NFL.com also has him at that 266. So perhaps that's what he started off with. At some point in his career, and they haven't updated it on other sites. That would lead me to believe he's probably going to be more of an edge player if that's what he's sort of auditioning to teams for. Because a lot of these guys are still having those top 30 visits and things like that.
Sure.
We'll see where they could put on at it without hold up. Anything else on him, or you want to move along here?
Nope. I think we'll go with your who's your next pick? Who you got?
I am going to go to one of my guys that doesn't have a ton of information behind him. He has really 1 year of production. That's Lucas Van Ness, the Luke Ness Monster, nickname that got thrown out for him that I just absolutely love. Going to be 22 this year. Is only a 3-star prospect coming out of high school. He ended as the second team All Big Ten in 2022. He's around 6'5", 264. The team gave him the nickname of Hercules, and if you see the guy, sort of the throwback to what Hercules is supposed to look like in Greek mythology. That's kind of what you'd envision with him. Now, he had great, relative athletic score, especially strength-wise. It's not amazing of what you'd want from him, but he has a good build where he could put on more muscle. But the speed grade, the agility grade were just fantastic. He's got good size overall, and he's a guy that doesn't have a lot of production. He wasn't a true starter at Iowa even this past year, but he played an enormous amount of snaps for him. He played essentially a starter share of snaps. So it doesn't concern me that he wasn't a starter in name. In 2 years there, he had 13 sacks, he had 19 tackles for a loss and 70 tackles. So he's pretty well productive across the board. He's going to be a guy that's going to go in the first round, I would think, just because he sort of like someone we talked about last week, Keon White. I think it was last week.
Yep.
Yeah, not this week. He's a guy that still has growing into the role to do. He needs to have more experience, but he has great hands too. He needs to probably finish plays more. He's better from the outside. They did use him a bit on the inside, and I didn't think he looked as well there. But athletically, he's got everything that you want. He's a smart player. He's active as far as paying attention to what's going on around him, not just getting lost. And he's got that good, strong, solid base, even if his upper body strength may not be ideally where it's at. That's again something you can add on to. And I'm just really excited. I've seen him, mocked as high as up around the early teens, or Philadelphia, something like that. So he's probably going to get that draft capital. Probably not going to be a year one amazing player, but if you're looking at a couple of years down the road and you say, wow, this guy ended up being a top 2-3 edge in the class, it wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah. I had done a mock earlier actually, and I mocked him 14 to the Patriots. So I could see him going that high. I mean, I think you look at that athletic profile, right? That RAS score that he's got. I mean, the speed and the agility really jump off the page. 4.58 for a guy that weighs 272 at 6'5". So they're going to be able to do some interesting things with him. And with that kind of speed, to be quite honest, I mean, if he is good in coverage and he understands it and he does it well, I mean, he is a guy that he can run with those running backs and he can get out in coverage. And so you add that versatility to the fact that he was an effective pass rusher in college. Like you mentioned, the 13 sacks, 19 tackles for loss in just 2 seasons. I guess the one thing that is concerning is, again, it's 2 seasons of play and you worry about the experience. But when you get to the NFL level, the only thing that really matters is what are you doing right now? And heading into the league, he's really put himself in a position to be drafted high. Like you mentioned, his physical stature. I mean, this is a guy who really takes a lot of pride in his craft, focuses on his body, takes care of himself. And I think that really says a lot about, how he approaches the game and the kind of professionalism that he could bring in the NFL level. And that's impressive. And anytime I see that, I definitely take notice. And I think that is meaningful. But yeah, he scored well. The bench press, for as physical as he is and his appearance and his, specimen, if you will, it's 17 bench press. He scored poorly on that. But again, that's not anything that can't be taught or can't be worked on. You worry a lot about in the NFL level. What are the other things that they're doing that can't be taught or are just really, really hard to get? And that the mental side of it. And so the physical part doesn't worry me as much. He does seem to be an intelligent football player. And so we'll see where he lands. I think he could go in the first round, potentially as high as, top 20 players. And if he does, he should have access to immediate playing time. And anytime, rookies get that, you always take notice. And you definitely want to have them a little bit higher on your rankings because I think that's important. I talk about it all the time.
Yeah, and talking about arm length, his arms are about 2 inches longer than the guy we talked about previously, Thule, which you think, all right, 2 inches, that isn't a whole lot. Well, at the NFL level where, every half an inch is an edge, they're talking about quarterback hand size and stuff every year. That stuff ends up mattering. And coverage-wise, again, not the be-all, end-all, but I mentioned Keon White. He had a 37.2 coverage grade last year at Georgia Tech, so, I mean, nothing he was asked to do a lot, but he didn't do well at it when he was asked to. Van Ness didn't do anything amazing, but he had a 66. So, I mean, that's not a terrible grade by any means. And until it shows you he's probably competent enough to learn it and do it if that's going to be something that they want him to do, which is at least a nice sign for how little he played in his career.
Yeah. I can at least legitimize the discussion about like arm length, especially for a player at the edge position who, it's important, like, when you're going up against the offensive lineman trying to create separation and being able to do that with explosive hands and extend your arms and create separation between you and the offensive lineman, whether it's a tackle or guard or like whoever you're going up against, to try to just create that space so that you can use that athleticism. And again, Lucas Van Ness has that athleticism where you give him a little bit of space, he's going to have the speed to cut inside or go around the edge and beat you that way. So yeah, I think there's some merit to that discussion. I don't know so much about the hand size and all that. Maybe so. I think it's always a funny discussion. So maybe people laugh at us for talking about arm length, but I could at least say, hey, here's the case for it. Like, here's how it's actually relevant and important. It
Yes.
doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be successful. It just means that it's something that can't be taught, right? It's like,
Yeah.
it's a tangible asset that you just can't learn, and you have to have.
It's another small slice of that whole pie, if you will, of their profile when they're going into the NFL. And it's like, how many of these boxes do they sort of check off that make you feel comfortable? How many do you not feel so comfortable with?
Of course. Yep.
Where do you want to move to?
Well, let's look at the list. Let's skip around. This is a fun one. Not necessarily somebody that is a name that you see very often when people are talking about IDP players, especially at the edge position. I'm not really sure where he's being mocked. I would imagine he's probably a day 2 player. At least I hope so, because I was very high on him when I started watching film this offseason. One of the guys that I picked out that I really liked was Drew Sanders, and then the other guy, edge rusher from Kansas State, actually. Not a big program. One of the big things that I worry about with him, playing in the Big 12 is you worry about the competition a little bit. Big 12 kind of gets a bad rap in that regard, but we'll say you look at the RAS on Felix Anudike-Uzomah and Uzomah. And he has a relative athletic score of 8.73, 33 and a half inch arm length. His agility scores were really, really excellent. His 3-cone and his shuttle looked good. He didn't do the bench press, no 40-yard dash, but his broad jump, he tested well, 10'4". He shows that he has that explosive ability. The thing that I really liked about him the most was he played with a lot of balance. This is this is a guy who is 6'3", 252, so he's not the biggest prospect, but I like the way that he plays. He plays with good balance. He's compact. He stays low. He's pretty physical for his size. Like he packs a punch. When he puts his hands on you, he's able to beat you with speed. So he does a lot of things that I personally really liked and saw in film and took note of and go, man, this could be a guy that quite honestly is a sleeper that no one's going to talk about. And I'm going to try to capitalize on it when rookie draft season comes around. So we got to see obviously where he lands in the draft. Probably a day 2 guy, probably not a first rounder, of course. But I'm going to be curious to see where he lands and if he's going to have access to, snaps that maybe some of the other guys on this list might not have. And if that happens, then I'm certainly going to take note, and I'm certainly going to try to keep my eyes on Anudike-Uzomah because he is a player that I do like from a film standpoint. How do you feel about Felix?
He has one thing that I really like, and you mentioned it, being aggressive but under control and having that high motor. You want to have those guys that are out there just constantly on the go, constantly moving their eyes, looking to make a play. And even if they're, going to have a higher learning curve here at the NFL level, they have that desire and they have that attitude to improve and keep honing their craft, which is something that I really like with him. I was trying to find it here and I couldn't. I don't know if it was his most recent one or the one before that, but Mel Kiper had him going in the first round, and I try to listen to those guys as much as I can because they're paying attention to what the teams are actually telling them and stuff. And there's talk of him being a fringe first rounder. Anyway, and if he gets that level of draft capital, for anyone, that's going to be something in their favor because the high investment is going to get people on the field. So
PFF has him ranked 32nd. I mean,
yeah, so right there.
That's interesting. I mean, gosh, that is wild. I mean, like I said, when I watched the film, I saw something. I was like, okay, this feels like a player who really has the talent to actually be impactful.
And he's got, the size and the length to put on some functional weight, get bigger, which I think would help him in the run. I saw him being a better pass rusher than he is at the run game. He needs to certainly improve consistency. He didn't have a ton of playing time there at Kansas State, but that's stuff that can be worked on. And like I said, he's an exciting guy that probably isn't that high on a whole lot of people's IDP boards, but he's going to be someone to be taken seriously if he gets that draft capital.
For sure. And then by the numbers, we since we talked about these other guys through 3 seasons at Kansas State, and I would say the first season is basically a wash. He had a sack, a tackle for loss, and then 1 total tackle. But during his last 2 seasons, I mean, this guy generated 20 and a half sacks, 26 and a half tackles for loss, and 97 total tackles. So he has a demonstrated ability to be in on the plays, make tackles. He's a good tackler. He is able to generate pressure in the back on the quarterback and be disruptive in the backfield. He gets flat. He's a good athlete. He's just somebody that I really like and am intrigued by.
All right. Well, I'm going to move to someone that I really wrestled with, like even having on our rankings over at RotoHeat.com. And it's Robert. It's Robert Beal Jr. And there isn't a whole lot of info out there about him. He was a 4-star prospect. He was a 2017 high school recruiting class. He didn't do a whole lot at Georgia. Like he played all 5 years. Well, he didn't play his junior year with the COVID season, but he was there 2018, 2019, 21, and 22. He played. Over those 4 seasons, he has 10 sacks, 11 and a half tackles for a loss, and 72 tackles. He just didn't do a whole lot. And you look at that and like, well, he was on really good Georgia teams for the most part. He was in rotations. That can be expected, but we mentioned with Jalen Carter last week, even with that amazing talent around him from a defensive tackle position, he was able to produce great numbers for a defensive tackle. Mm-hmm. And when you look at Beal, you look at a guy like, wow, he's a NFL player. I mean, he's imposing. He's got the size. There's just not a lot that I thought he did great at. He does have good burst off the ball. He's improved, during his time there. I know that doesn't really sound like it from the stats overall. And he certainly has the potential to, turn into something at the NFL level. But to me, he feels like a late day pick that has a lot of things he needs to work on. Someone's going to take a flyer and draft him, but it wouldn't surprise me to see if it was, middle of day 3 when he got drafted even later. So we have to talk about him I felt like, because he's from Georgia and, he has that look, and you can see some of those highlights that people love to go to on YouTube. Mm-hmm. Everyone's looking at the highlight reels, but there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of substance for him, unfortunately, for IDP purposes. What did you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's consistency. Like he flashes. And I think that shows in his RAS scores. The kid ran a 4.48 40, so he's extremely fast and explosive, and he's able to use that athletic ability to at times look the part. But the thing that drives me crazy is he wasn't consistent. And I don't know whether that was just he didn't get enough time on the field, or whether it was just purely that he just wasn't effective all the time. And to have 10 sacks, and again, this first season was kind of mostly a wash, I would say. But over his last 2 seasons, a combined 10 sacks, 11 and a half tackles for loss, and 72 total tackles. I mean, the tackles are all right, although you have 8 and 15 in 2018 and 2019. The other thing is, he's a 5-year college player, so he's going to come into the league a little bit older. Yep. So although we don't know his age, maybe that's because never mind. I was going to say he was born before they had like birth certificates or something. But no, he played 5 years in college, which, it's not an indictment against his game. There are plenty of good players like I can think of that have spent a long, 5 years in college and come to the league and be effective, and it doesn't really hurt them. It doesn't really help them as much either. But the athletic ability looks good to me. It's there, and I think that's where you see those flashes. But for me, it's just the consistency. I don't see any way that a team could draft him with confidence, with, having so low production in college and just not really being as effective as consistently as you would like to see. So I kind of tend to agree with you. He's probably a mid or even a late day 3 pick, and somebody may take a flyer on him. But the other thing is this guy, he's 6'4", 255. So, his weight he's not small by any means. And you spoke of like his physical stature, and this is another guy that, again, he takes care of his body. He trains hard, and you can definitely tell that. But I worry about his ability to, not just get washed out of the play and being undersized and things like that. So we'll see where he goes and where he lands and how it ends up for him, but not really anyone that I'm super high on this list or on my rookie watch list.
All right. Who's your next guy to go over?
Let's see. Let's go back to this list real quick. Okay. Let's see. Let's keep it. Oh, actually, you know what? Let's just let's jump over to the ACC to another really fun prospect. This kid, he comes from Clemson. He is 24 years old. He was a 5-star prospect coming out of high school, number 7 overall ranked recruit. So definitely a highly touted recruit coming out of high school into college. He didn't test at the combine or pro day. He did private team workouts on, what was it?
I think the
April
4th.
4th. Yeah. He's going to be 21 this season. We already said that. And so he was second team All ACC in 2021, and first team All ACC in 2022. 6'5", 275. So he has the size. And then you look at the RAS score. So he had a 40-yard dash of 4.63. Pretty impressive for that size. His 20-yard splits and 10-yard splits looked really good to me. Looked like he kind of lacked the explosiveness in terms of his vertical and broad jump. He didn't really score particularly well there. So that's a little bit concerning. But overall, I mean, he has an RAS of 8.39, which, out of 10, right? That's pretty good. He's a guy that I really liked a lot on film. The measurables are one thing, but the film is kind of another. And you look at his ability to, again, generate pressure on the quarterback, create plays in the backfield, and then tackling. He had 51 tackles in 2022, 9 tackles for loss and 3.5 sacks. So is he a sack artist? No, I wouldn't say he's a sack artist, but I do like the way that he plays. I like the athleticism that he possesses, the size that he possesses. He does look like he uses his hands well. He's able to, manipulate the offensive lineman and go inside, go outside, able to be effective going all different ways. And so he's an intriguing prospect for me in that regard. I'm not sure where he goes on draft day, though. I'm not sure. I mean, obviously, I think he's probably not a first day guy. Maybe mid-second round, middle of the second day is probably where I would guess. But what's your thoughts on KJ Henry?
Yeah, I struggled with him comparatively to sort of what we were looking at overall here. It was hard to like him when he was playing across from Myles Murphy a lot.
Totally unfair.
It is unfair. Like you said, he's got the good size and length. I thought he was good against the run, which is super important. You heard nothing about praise from his teammates and coaches about him, which I think that gets underscored how much that means to the NFL teams at times, because they want to be banking a guy that's not going to wash out, be getting into all sorts of trouble. Can't predict everything, of course, but generally speaking, I thought his inside rush was better than being from the outside. He had issues with keeping his eyes up. His hands I didn't think were as good as a lot of people in here. And then, his pass rush not being as good for IDP purposes. You can look at it two ways. An edge guy, you probably want to be trying to get some more of those big plays. On the other hand, tackles are safer. So if he's good against the run and he's going to be out there, you might have a safe floor. So it depends on your flavor of what you're looking for here. But yeah, I think he's probably a later day 2 pick, from the stuff that I look at and what I kind of feel about him. And it's just hard to tell because some of these edge guys are going to drop. There's a lot of these edge guys that I think are going to have nice careers in the NFL. And a lot of them are going to go in the first 2 days, but they're not all going to go. There's going to be guys, big talk 2 years ago, Azeez Ojulari. There's talk about him being a high first rounder, and part of it was medical stuff, but he fell to, like beginning mid of the second round. And he's been, fine so far. He's had a nice career so far in the NFL. He got banged up too. But the thing is, these guys fall for whatever reason. And there's a really top-heavy class for edge players. Some of these guys are going to fall. But I still think he has the overall makeup where a team's going to feel comfortable taking him. But for production-wise, I doubt he probably starts or gets a ton of playing time year one unless something happens in terms of injuries.
Yeah, agreed.
We're going to keep it with Clemson, though, since I brought him up. Anyway, Myles Murphy. So Myles Murphy, he's 21, 5-star prospect coming out of high school in the 2020 class. If you look at his numbers in 3 years, he had 36 tackles for a loss, 18.5 sacks, 116 total tackles. So he sort of did it all. And he has great size when you're looking at a guy 6'5", 275. He did end up sort of getting data out there for a relative athletic score of 9.71. He ended up doing that stuff, and data from the private workouts came up. But for that big of a man, that's a great score to get along with that production. He's a guy that really being talked about is going in the top half of the first round, and you can kind of see why. He could probably fit either as a defensive end or an outside linebacker, depending on where you wanted to go put him at. I think he'd be better as a defensive end. Some things about him, he is, I think right now he's our number 2 consensus IDP for the rookies over at RotoHeat.com, behind a guy we'll talk about later. I did think he needed to work on finishing tackles at times, and he needed to sort of improve his hands and just have a better finishing move. He needed to finish more. Like, he's always around the play. He's always back there getting pressure, and I think sometimes we overlook that because there's guys like Leonard Williams who get drafted really high and they just aren't in the right system, or they don't get the right coaching, where they're still getting tons of pressure, but they can't get home at the NFL level. He leaves the Jets and goes to the Giants, gets coached up right. He's getting home. He's getting you those big plays, those tackle for losses and sacks now. So that isn't like be all end all by any means, but it is something that, teams are going to consider, like, hey, they're around the quarterback a lot at least. And I think that's pushing a lot of his value up, is that he doesn't have off the wall numbers like some of these guys we're going to talk about in their situations, but he has good numbers, great size, great athletic ability, and he's always around the ball. So I definitely like him more out of the two. I'm sure you do too, but how did you feel about him?
I mean, he's a tremendous talent. You put the tape on and you watch this kid play, and right away you see the size. I mean, he just looks like an NFL player out there playing amongst college kids. You know what I mean? And so I really like the way that he tested. I mean, a 4.53 40. Oh my goodness. So he's going to be able to use that speed to get around the edge, and then he's got the size and explosive hands and the power. Like when he hits you, you know it. He's a big guy. Six, like you mentioned, 6'4". I think he is 6'5", 275. So you love to see that as well. The one thing I would say is that when you just look purely at like the big numbers, right? Like sack, tackle for loss, total tackles, 18 and a half sacks over 3 years, 36 tackles for loss, 116 tackles, nothing to scoff at. But I think the other thing that he does well is, you talked about his use of hands against offensive linemen. One thing, and there may be some merit to that, but what I would say that he does well with his hands, I mean, you look over the 3 years, each of the 3 years, I mean, he's getting pass defended. So he does a great job of getting his hands up in the lanes. He plays intelligently. He's able to impact the play in more ways than just generating sacks, tackles for loss, and tackles. So he did a good job of that. He also demonstrated a good job of forced fumbles. I mean, he had 6 forced fumbles in 3 years. So whenever he does get to the quarterback, I mean, his eyes are up. He's seeing the play. He's watching the quarterback, and he's got good timing with those hands. And he's reaching in, knocking the ball out, making plays. So even though he's not, making the tackle and sacking the quarterback, a turnover is as good as anything, right? Tackle for loss, sacks, those are all great things, but they keep the possession alive. But as soon as, you create a turnover, that possession's done, and now your team takes over. And I thought he did a really good job of making an impact on the defensive side in that regard. And I do think that's something that's going to translate well into the NFL for him. So definitely a prospect that I like. And I got a feeling at the end of this stream, we'll talk about him one more time, because it does look like we have some comments in the stream, and we'll definitely address those later. But he's a prospect that, again, you mentioned number 2 on our list, consensus. He seems to be the kind of player who looks the part and plays the part. And our expectations are across the board that he'll be that kind of player at the NFL. So very excited for Myles Murphy.
I did want to mention too, for him, we talk about PFF and sort of those ratings they have for college players as well. And it's not the be all end all. Numbers don't just jump off the page. He was a 79 overall, but when you break it down, he was a 72.8 against the run, 78.5 against the rush, and a 71.5 in coverage, which for a guy that size, to be able to across the board just have quality numbers, as far as making plays, not making mistakes in all 3 phases. I think that's really important. And to your point, speaks to sort of the explosion, the agility, just the do it all that he has at that size. I mean, that's just purely an NFL guy. So
sure.
Who would you like to go on to next year?
All right, let's see. This guy is, let's skip over to, we were in the ACC. Do we have any way to stay? Nope, we don't. All right, let's skip out of the ACC. We're going to save some of our SEC players, and we're going to skip over to the Big 12 here. Talk about a guy from Iowa State who I really like, Will
Oh yeah.
McDonald the fourth, I think he is.
Yep.
He's being projected as high as the first round,
Yep.
or early second round. And then you look at his RAS score, tremendous, 9.67 score, ran a 4.7 40-yard dash, his 20-yard split, 10-yard split. His agility looked great with his shuttle time and 3-cone times. The vertical and broad jump look magnificent. I mean, he's testing off the charts. Really just showing off his athletic profile, his explosion. And then you look at the size, 6'4", 245. So he has ideal size, although he is a little on the slight side in terms of weight. But I think that he really is going to excel in getting off the edge. His explosion off the line, his ability to get around the edge and create pressure. You look at what he did. This is another guy who's been in college football for 5 years now, since 2018, and over those 5 years, he was able to generate 34 sacks, 40.5 tackles for loss, and 125 tackles. In 2021 and 2020, he really did a lot of things well. Both years, he finished with double-digit sacks, double-digit tackles for loss. 2022, he did take a short step back, only 5 sacks and 7.5 tackles for loss. But I think he's shown enough in his game to really earn his spot amongst the first-round guys. And I definitely think his athletic profile here shows that he's the kind of player who could really be a difference maker if he lands in the right spot.
Yeah, you talk about like explosion and bend, and having a great frame in that length. He's got a nice spin move. Just as a pass rusher, that guy has what you want coming into the NFL. Mm-hmm. He has active hands too, sort of like you mentioned with the last guy. I think last year McDonald had 4 pass deflections. He had 7 over 3 years there in college, so that's great to see.
Yeah.
He needs to add some strength and get that functional strength for the NFL level to be well-rounded and hold up better against the run. I think run defense is his biggest issue. But like I said, he's been a late comer on here in terms of this edge group sneaking into the first round, and it wouldn't surprise me at all to see him in the 20s coming up here.
Yeah, and we talked about forced fumbles on, with Myles Murphy too. I mean, Will McDonald had 10 over 5 years, and in 2021, he had 5 forced fumbles. So this is another guy, again, that he's got his eyes up. He's looking for the quarterback, and when he gets close, I mean, he's able to put his hands in the right places and create turnovers that way, and that's a big deal.
All right, moving on. We are going to jump to a guy that I didn't know a whole lot about before we started digging into these guys, as that'll happen. Dylan Horton, he's going to be 23 this year. He's a 3-star prospect coming out. He spent 2 years at linebacker for New Mexico, and then he transferred to TCU. We ended up moving to defensive end, about 6'4", 244 pounds. His RAS was not probably as great as what you'd want for a guy that converted from linebacker to a defensive end. His sizing out as far as the defensive end, nothing special. He had great explosion score, which is a big thing that you want, be able to get off the ball and get moving to either the guy that has the ball, running back, quarterback, or whatever, or push that offensive lineman back. Not great agility in the side-to-side stuff and the speed stuff. Short speed stuff wasn't great. 40-yard dash at like a 4.74 was perfectly fine for a defensive end. Hands, agility, quickness, bend, those things aren't his bread and butter. He is more of a power guy. Like I mentioned, I think he is probably a true 4-3 defensive end. I think he'd have a hard time going out there to be an outside linebacker. He, as opposed to a lot of these guys we talk about, I thought he kept great pad level throughout his playing. He knows how to keep low, which puts him in good position. It helps him out with some of those, maybe agility and speed deficiencies comparatively. He's got great explosion and power, and he has a NFL defensive end frame. So is he a day 2 guy? Could be. Early day 3 maybe. But he was sort of a pleasant surprise in terms of, we see a lot of these guys with these pass rushers. It's just speed and agility and getting around, where he's just more of a throwback to a power guy. And there's a couple of those on the list here, but it was a nice difference to see there. How do you feel about him?
Yeah, I saw that in his game, and I think he was able to get away with that in college in the Big 12. You look at the bench press, 18 reps. I mean, I'm not saying that that's the end-all be-all for him at the NFL level, but I will say, I would have liked to have seen that number been better for a guy with that kind of play style. He's not going to keep up with everybody in the NFL running a 4.74.
Yep.
I mean, that's not slow by any measure, but it's certainly not fast enough that you would feel comfortable dropping him back into coverage or, sending him out against running
Exactly.
backs unless you're putting him in a favorable situation. Um, is it possible that he even can convert back to like more of an outside linebacker role? Maybe. I'd be more intrigued by that probably than I would by just having him committed to trying to go as an edge rusher where he's purely, playing on the line, trying to rush off the edge. I think he lacks the size, quite honestly, to do that. And so uh, outside of his 1 year at 2022 at TCU, I mean, 9 total tackles for loss in 2021, 4 sacks, 51 tackles. That's a good number. But outside of that, I mean, his first 3 seasons, he was relatively ineffective.
Yep.
Granted, he played a lot less time, but again, it's limited production when you look at his career, 5-year career, and comparatively to the time that he spent in college. He did kind of have limited production, especially if you exclude the 2022 season. So for all of those reasons, I do have my concerns and my reservations, and I do think that he's a player that could be probably a late day 2 guy that a team takes a chance on, and then we'll see what he does in camp. If he's able to kind of work his way into a position, but I think it's going to be a little bit of an uphill battle for him, and for that reason, I'm kind of out on Dylan Horton.
Yeah, he's a guy that you're probably not going to have to draft unless you're in a deep IDP league. And even then, he's going to be a late round pick that's better off probably put on your taxi squad if you have one, or leaving on waivers, because it may be a few years, 3 years before he's out there a lot, if he ends up being out there a lot at all.
Yep.
I think we got 4 guys left here. Who would you like to head to?
Well, we get to skip over to, let's make sure we didn't miss anybody here. It doesn't look like we did. It looks like we can skip over into the SEC now, and a familiar name, if you will, and not because of his own play, but the play of his brother. We talked about him a little bit earlier on the show, Azeez Ojulari, his younger brother, of course, BJ Ojulari, who hails from LSU. He just turned 22. He was a 4-star prospect coming out of high school in the 2022 recruiting class. First team all SEC in 2022, and 50th overall in 2020 Azeez Ojulari went 50th overall in the 21 draft. 6'3", 244. So again, a guy who is a little on the slight side. I would have liked to have seen him test in the 40-yard dash and do some of those agility and some of that agility scoring. I think that he actually would have tested really well in that regard. You look at the production over 3 years at LSU, not really anything super, super impressive in terms of sacks, 16.5 sacks. I think his highest sack total in a single season was 7 in 2021. That same season, he had 12 tackles for loss and 54 tackles. So by all accounts, 2021 was kind of his season. Last year, though, he finished with 58 tackles, 8.5 tackles for loss, and 5.5 sacks. So he still was able to be pretty productive in terms of tackles. So I think he does a good job of, getting to the football, making plays, wrapping up, making the tackles. He's still able to be effective in the backfield in terms of tackles for loss. He is able to get to the quarterback, does appear to have active hands at times, and was able to force some fumbles at times as well over that 3 years. Again, not anything super, super impressive. I'm not so sure that I trust him to be as effective as his brother is. I think his brother is, significantly more talented than he is. But he is an intriguing prospect in terms of just his athletic ability. So we'll see where he goes. I think currently he's being mocked as a day 2 guy as well. And I think it's fairly early, like early to mid day 2. But what's your thoughts on BJ Ojulari?
I, like you, didn't think he was as exciting as his brother was. And there's quite a few people out there in the IDP community that really like him and think that he's better than his brother. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. I didn't think he looked as good on the field, and he didn't test as well as his brother either. But they're both 3-4 outside linebackers. Again, some of the just intangible things, he knows sort of what it takes to get to the NFL with his brother being in there. By all accounts, he's a quality person, great teammate. He gives a lot of effort. He's got a nice burst. He's got a variety of moves. Run defense leaves some to be desired. He needs to add more functional strength for the NFL level, keep his pad level low. Just a lot of things that, maybe they might be the finer points that you need to work on. But even with this great edge class and a lot of these guys, I think going in the first round, I think he's going to be drafted later than his brother was. I don't think that was as good of an edge class overall. And I think you're going to see some of these guys that might not be talked about as much. We talked about a few of them earlier, like Will McDonald, that are going to sneak up on people and say, wow, surprised Ojulari's still there and they took McDonald.
Mm-hmm.
I think McDonald's a better prospect than Ojulari at this point. Looking at the two of them, I'd be fine taking a late flyer on him, but certainly in IDP leagues, I'm not taking him anywhere near where his brother went. And maybe he'll prove me wrong. I hope he does in his long, successful career, but he just has more to work on. I didn't like him as much as his brother or a number of these other guys we have on our list.
Agree with that.
One more guy in the SEC that we probably don't need to talk about a whole lot because he's the most talked about, I guess, defensive player in this draft, probably. Well, Jalen Carter might be talked about more, but not for the right reasons. Will Anderson Jr., outside linebacker for Alabama, 22 this year, a 5-star prospect, number 17 overall prospect out of high school in 2020. Did not test at pro day or combine because he absolutely did not need to. Looking at what he did overall in his career, in 2022, he was a Lombardi Award winner, a unanimous All-American, first-team All-SEC, SEC Defensive Player of the Year, and he was the Bronco Nagurski Trophy winner in 2022 and the prior year, 2021. When you look at his stats and you want to talk about someone that jumps off the page in terms of the statistics that he put up, this is the guy. And his last year, 2022, was not as good as 2021 when he just went ballistic. Yeah. But even his first year there, 7 sacks and 10.5 tackles for a loss. That's with being in more of a rotational role, even though he did start. 2021, 17.5 sacks, 31 tackles for a loss with 101 combined tackles. It was going to be hard to repeat that, and he didn't. But 10 sacks, 17.5 tackles for a loss, 51 tackles. He was just a do-it-all edge guy. Now, you can nitpick anyone. There's things that he needs to work on. But if you want to be talking about if you're going to put your money on someone being a quality NFL player for a long time and worthy of having on your fantasy team, Anderson's my guy, and I'm not guessing twice here. So he's going to need to work on stuff. He might need to add a little bit of strength here. I think as far as just an outside edge rusher, he can be immediately plugged into pretty much any NFL team and be productive for you in a situational role. So
I'm curious, specifically, what is it that you see? And short answer, because I know you just kind of, you said, hey, here's the prospect, here's what I think, here's all the things. But short answer, what is it that you see that is the most, like recognizable thing when you watch him play that makes you so confident and makes everyone so confident, if you will, that he's going to be successful at the NFL level? It's not the 17.5 sacks and it's not the 31 tackles for loss in 2021. At least it shouldn't be. Like, yeah, of course, those numbers are impressive and probably indicative of future success. But what is it for you that makes you so confident to say that?
When you look at the tackles that he got while at Alabama, being surrounded by just a whole bunch of other players that are going to play in the NFL, that he was able to fly around the field and get tackles all over the place, that says a lot. There's guys, and I like them. I'll hit them a heck of a lot in Buffalo. Greg Rousseau, he was just sort of like a one-trick pony in college, where he was your pass rusher specialist that was getting to the quarterback, getting that backfield. He wasn't getting a ton of tackles. Will Anderson is that, and he's out there getting you tackles, which you're not always going to get a sack or a tackle for a loss, even from an edge guy at the NFL level every game. But if you can count on a nice, safe floor for tackle-wise, plus those big plays thrown in there, from day one, I think that's a great opportunity to get us fantasy value and also stay out there on the field, because if you're out there making plays, your team's going to want to keep you out there more.
Right. So I'm going to for anybody who's actually watching this, I'm going to tell you guys exactly what the answer is. The answer is he's intelligent. When you put the tape on and you watch him play, you can literally see it on the film. He's intelligent. He knows when to get flat. He knows how to manipulate his, I wouldn't say defender because they're offensive players, but like the offensive line, like he knows how to create that separation and see the play with his eyes and then go make the and like that's why he's getting those tackles. That's why he's getting the sacks and tackles for losses, because he's able to do that and keep his eyes up and then get to the football and then also still be creating disruption at the same time. Yes, that's a combination of the fact that this guy's 6'4", 235. So again, he's not the biggest guy in the class in terms of size, but the speed and agility, and I think what he's got going on upstairs and his, understanding of the game is tremendous. And you can see that when you watch the tape. You don't have to look at the numbers to see that. With this kind of size, being 235, I definitely think that he has the ability to be able to drop back into coverage. I think it looks right here like he ran a 4.6 on his RAS score. I think that's more than sufficient for him to be able to be reliable in coverage and also still be effective off the edge. So I love his versatility. But for me, the thing that just totally jumped off the screen whenever I watched the film was you could literally tell play by play. And when you watch the all play on this guy, the all 22, he's impressive. I mean, just his football IQ is off the charts comparatively to the field. And I think that's the one thing for me that really made him truly special.
Well, and he has the physical tools to match that. I mean,
yes,
some players have one, some players have the other. He has all of that. And the coverage stuff he wasn't asked to do a ton of at Alabama. And I mean, why would you? You have that sort of team around him. He was like out there as a true freshman, to your point, playing for Nick Saban, which just doesn't happen. So if I again had to bet on someone being a productive IDP player, an NFL player for a long time, it'd be him out of the group. So
absolutely.
That leaves us with the SEC, two more guys here, and they're from the same team. We're going to go with the one that I knew less about, Colby Wooden. He's with Auburn, turns 23 this year, 4-star prospect coming out of high school, 6'5", 278. And when you look at him, he has a very nice RAS score as well with a 9.26. Some of these guys, we had lower ones here, but pretty much everything other than been a few of these guys. Actually, the bench press wasn't necessarily what you wanted. Weight for his height wasn't ideal they have him here as like a defensive tackle. I, again, think he's probably more of a defensive end myself, but elite speed score, 4.79, 40-yard dash. His shuttle 3-cone were just fantastic. Broad jump was great. He's competitive. He is really good at setting the edge, I thought, and he's a quality pass rusher. Are they going to move him inside? That's sort of one of my questions, because if he is more of a defensive tackle, the value just isn't there the same for our purposes in IDP. So sort of that question. Had some trouble getting off blocks, and I think his versatility can hurt him from our perspective again, because if they are having him as a defensive end, but then move him into not getting, generally speaking, as many opportunities as you would. So he's definitely a defensive lineman. I don't think there's a question that he's going to end up being an outside linebacker in anybody's scheme. And I think he's probably 3rd round, 4th round type of prospect. But he's an interesting guy to look at, kind of like I talked about prior on and I forget whose name it was that I mentioned. Dylan Horton, I think, was the guy that we talked about, where he reminded me of him just with the size and the way that he played it. More of a true just defensive end. So,
yeah, he really tries to use that power in his game, when he's, rushing off the edge. And sometimes, like you mentioned, I think that can kind of get him in trouble with his ability to get off blocks. I don't really think he does an excellent job of creating separation between himself and the lineman that he's going up against. A lot of times what he'll try to do is just overpower the lineman. He plays a little bit high at times. That was one thing that I saw, but he does play with pretty good balance. Like to see his block shedding improve. I think that's one area that he could for sure improve in. His sack numbers weren't, anything super, super special. 6 sacks in 2022 was a career high for a season. 11.5 tackles for loss, 45 tackles. He's pretty consistent in the tackle category. So at least in college, he had a good floor there. But I worry about, him having some limitations and at the NFL level. I don't know that he's just going to be able to just overpower everyone. And, so he's a little bit lower on my list, but again, he is still an intriguing prospect in terms of, you look at this RAS score, he ran a 4.7940. All of his agility testing looked really good. So you do like to see that from a guy who could potentially be moved inside. I would agree that I think the way he plays, certainly not going to put him in an outside linebacker role. He's certainly like a more traditional edge rusher and could potentially be moved inside, especially, looking at his size, 6'5", 278. But, the speed is interesting from the inside. If they were to move him there, I'd be curious to see if you would be able to make good use of that from the inside and be effective that way. So we'll see where he goes. We'll see how he gets used, what system he goes into. He's got some intriguing qualities, but overall, I think he's kind of a prospect that I'm a little bit lower on.
As a segue into it, who did you like more out of him or the next guy on our list here, Derek Hall?
Man, that's interesting. Probably Derek Hall, just because I think of the speed and the playmaking all over the field. I think he has the ability to cover more ground. And he is younger, 22 years old, 6'3", 251. So again, not the biggest player in this class, but when you look by the numbers, whether it's, the RAS score or the production, overall, I thought his RAS score looked really good. I mean, he ran a 4.57, and that just speaks to that. His agility scoring was great and his ability to cover ground. I think this is a guy who we could see probably be more productive off the edge and even potentially be able to play in more of an outside linebacker role. He was able to generate 5 forced fumbles over 4 years. Didn't do a whole lot as far as passes defended. So in coverage, he didn't do a whole lot, but he was able to generate some sacks, 19.5 sacks, 29.5 tackles for loss, and 146 tackles, which I think really shows a demonstrated floor for him. And I think that's important at the NFL level. Again, I don't think that he's an elite prospect. I think he's, again, probably a day 2 guy. I would say early to mid day 2, probably not second round, but maybe late second or third, not early. So we'll see where he goes, what kind of system he gets in as well, and see if he's able to do something at the NFL level. He's certainly worth keeping an eye on, I think.
The thing that I liked out of him is he was the most aggressive guy just on the field out of these guys that we watch. I mean, he just has a motor and he wants it. And the pass rush for the guy, I mean, clearly he doesn't always hit home with those stats out there, but he is always just, heat-seeking missile, if you want to call it, from that rushing position. Now, that can cause issues for you, recognition. Is it a play fake or something like that? Issues.
Getting too deep.
Yeah. Flexibility and, the bend weren't elite, but the power that he has, the aggression, good arm length, like you said, that frame is nice. I think he's going to have a career in the NFL, and I think he could, with the right coaching, certainly turn into a great edge rusher. So he's out of sort of these later names that we're talking out here outside of Will Anderson, one of the guys that I'm really interested to see how high he goes at the NFL level, because if he gets that, day 2 second round draft capital at all, I think they're going to be looking at the same sort of stuff, saying, all right, he's got that motor and that flexibility to go get the quarterback. We just need to probably rein him in a little bit so he isn't just biting too hard on some of these plays. But I'd rather have that than a guy who's passive. And I think that's how the NFL sort of looks at it too. So,
yeah, and if you could teach discipline to a guy like that and have him be able to get straight down the line on plays and not, not essentially just wash himself out of the play just purely by trying to use his athleticism more than he should, then I definitely think that that's going to be good for his game.
And that's going to do it for our edge rushers. Again, if you got any guys that you have more questions on, hit us up. You can see at RotoHeat Austin, at RotoHeat Kraig, Discord, you can go find us, Facebook. And next week, we are going to have our little game we've played the past 2 years, sort of predicting what we think is going to happen in the NFL draft. First cornerback taken, who's it going to be, all that sort of fun stuff. And we'll sort of recap the NFL draft from an IDP perspective and how we did the following week after the draft is all said and done. But that's it for tonight. And then we're going to get to comments before we go. So you mentioned here earlier, and this one has to be warming your heart a little bit, Austin, from I Hate the NFL. Man, imagine Miles Murphy on the same line with Chris Jones and Karl Loftus. That would be nasty. It looks like you're hoping that he could maybe fall that far to make that a dream come true for you.
Yeah, I don't know if he could make that kind of a fall. Honestly, I think he'll probably be gone before we have the opportunity to get him. I'm not so sure that Chiefs would take him in the first round. Maybe it's possible. I don't know really what the Chiefs have planned for the first round of the NFL draft. So I won't rule out the possibility that he could be there, but I definitely would like the idea of it. I mean, as a Chiefs fan, like, yeah, let's make it happen. I think he would be a great addition to that defense.
Do you see them in, the board, who's there available, trade offers, all that, of course, matter. But do you see them potentially going with a second edge player, 2 years in a row here at the end of the first round?
I mean, I said it at the beginning of the show. It's one of the most important positions on the field. These guys are getting paid as such, and you see them being drafted as such. It's always fun in fantasy to talk about like offense, right? Receivers, quarterbacks, running backs. They're the exciting players. They're the shiny players. But you look at aside from quarterbacks and receivers, because the NFL is trending in a direction where like your passing game has to be exceptional, and the running game kind of matters less, where you're having more running back by committee. That position is a position that takes a beating. And but Bijan, for example, gets a lot of talk in fantasy. Like, you can't even get on Twitter without hearing somebody talk about or reading somebody talking about Bijan Robinson. And it's a lot of fun to just beat that horse to death. But you look at the NFL and how they really value players, and you see the edge position specifically is becoming one of the most important positions in football. And the reason is, we talked about it, right? The quarterback and receiver positions are so important in the offense, the way the NFL is trending. It's like the passing game. You have to have an elite passing game. But I can tell you what, you can combat that with effective pressure. Being able to generate sacks, being able to generate tackles for loss, being able to generate turnovers, all of those things are drive killers. All of those things make it an uphill climb for any offense, including my beloved Chiefs, Patrick Mahomes. And then you got to throw in, discipline. If the Chiefs offense isn't disciplined and the defense that they're facing is disciplined, when I'm always watching games, I'm always like, okay, hey, we need a penalty here. A penalty can be a drive killer just as much as a tackle for loss or a sack can. And so all of those things are for defenses. They're realizing that you're not going to be able to stand out there and just cover forever. So how are you going to be able to get that offense in a bad position? And I think the way that they're doing that is, creating pressure off the edge, making plays in the backfield, sacking the quarterback, creating turnovers with your use of hands, defending passes at the defensive line, with having, again, active hands, just being in the right spot, knowing those passing lanes and getting your hands up and making plays that way. So the defensive end position specifically just seems like at the NFL, it's a valuable position. And so I don't know why. I don't necessarily think they wouldn't, just because they did it last year. I don't think that that's a reason enough for the Chiefs to go, yeah, we did that last year, we probably shouldn't do that this year. I don't think that's true.
It makes me wonder with, looking at the depth again, maybe we see more of these guys fall than we think too, when they're saying, hey, there's 6 edge rushers that we really like, that we have a second round grade on even, maybe we go to a different position. If there's more value there than some of these guys, it'll be interesting. But that last year, that contract, to your point with how valuable these edge players are getting, and the contracts are getting sometimes at 5th year option, is what puts it over the edge. Saying, hey, we could keep this guy for another year cheap if we wanted to.
Yeah. And I guess the other thing that's kind of interesting is I'm not so sure that Miles Murphy's game complements George Karlaftis. They're kind of similar in their play styles, like more of traditional edge rushers. Miles Murphy is, very athletic for his size, but I do think that he's less likely to be slotted in as like an outside linebacker role. I think he's more of a traditional edge rusher, and their games are very, very similar. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but also I kind of wouldn't mind seeing the Chiefs do something a little bit different, opposite of Karlaftis, where Karlaftis could be more of a hand in the dirt, and then on the opposite of him, I'd like to see somebody with a little more versatility who's still able to be effective off the edge. So just my 2 cents as a fan.
We had one more person, Gary, the IDP tipster himself, stopping by to say hello. Thanks for tuning in, Gary. Gary has 2 podcasts that he's doing over at the Sports Gambling Podcast Network, dropping articles and stuff too. And one of the original few guys that was really big in the IDP community. So thanks for stopping by, Gary. We appreciate it.
We appreciate it. We have attracted IDP goats.
Yeah, evidently, which is nice to see.
Absolutely.
Any closing words for everyone tonight here, Austin, before we really head into the last 2 weeks of the NFL draft, pre-draft season?
We say it every week. We appreciate everybody coming and watching week in and week out. And whether this is your first time or whether you're a weekly visitor, we just appreciate you guys. Whether you're listening live or whether you're listening to this on playback, we appreciate everyone who follows us. With that said, our Twitter handles are on the screen, at RotoHeat Austin, at RotoHeat Kraig. You can follow us on Twitter for more IDP content, as well as at RotoHeat.com, where we have rankings, articles, and all kinds of other fun stuff. Be sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel before you go to make sure that you're getting the updates whenever we go live. Hop in the show, hop in the comments, chat with us. And as always, thank you guys just for stopping in and supporting us. We just appreciate it so much.
That's going to do it for us tonight, everybody. Thanks again for tuning in here. We'll be back next week. Same bat time, same bat channel. Getting you ready for the NFL draft. Have a great night, everybody.